In today's show, Tom Dundon sits down for a long-form interview with Max Kellerman and Rich Paul, talking renovation, relocation, and spending to win. But he might not know what he doesn't know. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. In today's show, we're going to talk about Tom Dundon's public comments on the Game Over podcast with Max Kellerman and Rich Paul, where he talked about his perception of being cheap, the ongoing process of the renovations, the negotiations surrounding renovations to the arena, and wanting to spend to win and run the team the right way. My biggest concern is that Tom Dundon doesn't know what he doesn't know, and we will get to that. But let's start with what he does know, and that's winning. When Tom Dundon took over the Carolina Hurricanes, they stunk. Then he took over, and they've been incredibly good. They've been one of the best teams, most successful teams in the NHL over the last, since he took over in 2018, basically for this first full season onward. They haven't missed the playoffs since. They've been incredibly good, incredibly successful. I mean, they haven't won a Stanley Cup, but they've played in the Eastern Conference Finals. They're rolling right now in the NHL playoffs. And Dundon, in his interview with Max Kellerman and Rich Paul on their podcast Game Over, which came out on May 15th, that's Friday's show. I will link to that show in the show notes for this episode. He discussed about, winning. And while his take over the Hurricanes, says I'm confident it's gonna work. I'm just, and certainly with how successful the Carolina Hurricanes have been, that isn't exactly the type of thing that erodes your confidence. But he talks about a couple things. So one is that he was going to run the team properly, but he wants to win. I think you can read into the sort of loaded part of that first statement, like what the word properly means, right? And what the word properly means in both from everyone's perspective, right? Like what proper means from Tom Dundon's perspective, what it means from the folks that work within the organization's perspective, and what it means from the fan perspective. But we will get into the sort of maybe the more nuances of a lot of the language that Dundon chose to use later in the show. What I want to focus on in this first segment is the winning, right? And the things he's saying the right things you want from an owner. There's no doubt about that. He was asked specifically, I guess he just met Rich Paul. I will say this, the tone of this whole interview is incredibly positive. Max Kellerman really likes Tom Dundon. It's clear he really likes Tom Dundon. And apparently Rich Paul and Tom Dundon had just met at the NBA draft combine, where Rich was there with his numerous clients, I guess, and Dundon was there kind of just like checking it out, seeing what the word is. And he said that he doesn't really like the draft combine. And I was like, amen. It's worthless. Why would you worry about a cone drill when there's hours and hours of college basketball film to watch on these guys, or in some cases, professional basketball film in Europe? But he kind of talked about his approach as an owner. And, I think Dundon has this reputation of being super hands-on. And he hasn't really pushed back on that. Maybe he doesn't like the term like hands-on because it suggests meddling. But, he admits that he wants to think about things and be involved in the sort of that thought, the day-to-day thoughts, right? How much he'll actually be involved remains to be seen, but obviously he'll be very much involved in the Blazers' big picture decisions, and those big picture decisions will inform the day-to-day decisions. So he kind of pushed back on, or he offered that through the draft process that with the Hurricanes, he'll push back against his scouts. If you fall in love with one guy during the scouting process, why are you in love with that one guy? Or if that guy isn't on the board, who else would you take? And kind of make them defend their positions, right? And it's sort of, it isn't just, it's playing devil's advocate, but for the purpose of saying you don't know exactly how the draft is going to play out, and getting locked into one plan is not effective. What are our options? But he says I'm not making the picks. Let him make the picks. And then he kind of brags about hiring Rod Brindamore, who he hired, who was an assistant coach with the Hurricanes. He promoted him to head coach, and the Canes have just taken off. They're just incredible. He said, with the Hurricanes, I hired the best coach in the world, but I'm not coaching the team, he is. And so what Dundon is sort of touting there is that his job is to find the right people and let them work. And while he might push and prod to make sure that they are standing on their beliefs of how they work, is that his goal is to his goal is to, hire the best folks. And if you're a longtime listener to this podcast, shout out to my everydayers, you know that I think like the most important thing an owner can do is hire the right people and get out of the way. Now, Tom Dundon's like willingness to get out of the way may be in question, but in terms of what you want from an owner and like how a good owner would operate, hire the best people and let them do their jobs, to me is like, because Tom Dundon doesn't know the NBA. He doesn't know the NHL. He's a smart business person. Like, he's made a bunch of money, right? But he doesn't the sort of the nuances of how the rosters are built and how the transactions work and all of those things and how to motivate players. Like, that's not his purview, right? But hiring the right people and getting out of the way. And he mentions in this interview that has been his approach for the most part. And I don't think you can argue with his success with the Hurricanes. Hockey ain't basketball. The NBA and the NHL are very, very different. And while I don't like it, if the Hurricanes sucked, we would use it as an indicator that Dundon is an idiot, right? We would use it as a negative indicator. So I don't, I just think what I'm trying to do here is just separate the two things. Acknowledging Dundon's success with the Carolina Hurricanes, which I think is undeniable. And then also saying here, like, the NBA is a different beast. The way contracts work, the level of spending required, probably the general power of players and probably the power of agents as well. See Rich Paul having a podcast. It is just a very different beast, right? And so, while I do think it would be commonplace to say, well, he hasn't done well in hockey, why would he do well here? I probably wouldn't do that, and I certainly won't point in the other direction to say he's done well in hockey, so he'll do here. I just don't think it's a one-to-one translation. But the way he talked is the way you would want an owner to talk. The proof, however, will be in the pudding, and let's talk about that pudding, because I think the most interesting thing that Dundon said about winning is like he wants to win. That's the thing that, he wants to make money, but he's more motivated by winning. That is his biggest motivation. And he said something that I think is really key here. He said, if we have a chance to win, the tax is irrelevant. When he was asked by Rich Paul, I believe, about going in the tax. The NHL, hockey has a true hard cap. Like, it has a line that you cannot go over unless players are injured or something like that. You can cross over it with some injuries. And I think there's some other nuances that I don't understand because I don't follow the NHL like that. But the NBA has what is effectively a hard cap for many teams, but functionally a soft cap. By that, I mean, you can go over it, and you can go over it and spend if you're willing to, one, pay the luxury tax, and two, deal with some punitive measures that make it less desirable to go over the cap. But you don't have to go deep into the second apron to have to pay the luxury tax. And if you pay the luxury tax, what you don't get is the disbursement of luxury tax payments. So right now, this season, 4 teams are over the luxury tax. It's not common, right? I don't expect this year immediately for Tom Dundon to say, we're just going to spend crazy like 1999 Paul Allen. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when the team's actually good. And I think this is really important. Like, I think the Denver Nuggets are a good example of this. When you are championship level good, worrying about finances when you have like a 3 to 5 year window at the absolute max to win championships is how you end up a loser. So this isn't going to come up for Tom Dundon right now. Not this season. Blazers aren't championship level good, and I don't think there are moves they could make this summer that would put them... I mean, there are a series of moves. Sure. I take it back. Right now, as they stand, with relatively minor moves, they probably can't jump into the contenders circle. But if moves were to come up that would allow them to feel like they are there, and I think there is something like, you can look in the mirror and say, we're no worse than 5th in the West. We should spend because we're good. We should make this trade and go into the tax because we're going to be that good. You do it. That's the right thing to say. You want Tom Dundon to say that. If he had skirted that question, it would have been really dicey. He didn't. He said, if we have a chance to win, the tax is irrelevant. But that will be tested. That is a really good thing to say in May. The Blazers will probably improve over the lifetime of Tom Dundon owning the team, depending on how long that is. Let's call it 10 to 40 years. I guess he's 50 something, 10 to 25 years. It is... The Blazers will get to a point where they are indeed good enough, and one move could make them have a reasonable chance of winning. And if that one move would push you pretty deep into the tax, are you willing to do it? That will be tested. This is exactly what you want to hear from Tom Dundon. That type of winning and willing to spend, that's exactly what you want to hear, because there is all this buzz, and I think some of it is like very clearly true based on his comments that we'll get to later in the show. Is like he does intend to cut costs, but he keeps saying it's like it's not going to touch the players. He's not going to spend money that touches the players. I don't know if later in the show, I don't think he understands what does and does not touch the players at this point. But this is the type of language that you would want from an owner, right? This is the type of language you'd want from an owner. And then they asked him some other stuff, including about relocating the team. And obviously there is a lot of buzz around the Blazers getting finalizing negotiations to reach an agreement to renovate the arena, which includes lease negotiations. And those things, if in place, would squash all the speculation that the Blazers are leaving town. What Dundon says is, shoot, when I bought the Hurricanes, everyone thought I was going to leave town too. And I didn't. I haven't spent any time on that. But he gives up the goods. He tells you exactly what the deal is, and nothing has changed. Let's talk about how nothing has changed while everything has changed around relocation and the Blazers' renovation negotiations. Join me in that second segment. We will do just that. First, though, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. If you've got a sweet tooth, you know that it can be tough to find that perfect treat without all the sugar. You're looking for, a no sugar alternative that is that still hits your sweet tooth the way you want it to, lets a little boost to your blood sugar, makes you feel good. Well, that's why the Confetti Craze 5 Hour Energy Shot brings the nostalgic flavor back in a whole new way. The classic taste you remember, with a tasty caffeine boost, TM, and zero sugar. It's a quick, easy way to satisfy that sweet craving while keeping things simple and on the go. It's like a birthday cake flavor, but you can't be eating sweets all day, so this is your alternative. Confetti Craze 5 Hour Energy Shots got that vanilla and buttery flavors to let you unapologetically be extra and unstoppably energized. All cake, no sugar. It can be your go-to when you want something sweet without going overboard, and they're super convenient and available on the go because the 5 Hour Energy Shots are small, fit in your pocket, fit in your bag, and they're ready to take anywhere. The Funfetti flavor is back on 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. Crack open Confetti Craze 5 Hour Energy Shots today. Today's show is also brought to you by Indeed. If you've got all of the workplace chaos that comes with running a team, deadlines stacking up, your inbox is overflowing, and you still got a position on your crew that needs to be filled, well, that's why you need Indeed sponsored jobs, because when the pressure's on, you need the right hire to reach people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your job post. Instead, you're spending less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. That's less stress, that's less time, and more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs, and listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help you get your job the premium status it deserves on Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support my show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. All right. Thanks for making this show your first listen. If you're living that everyday lifestyle, go ahead and make it official. Join the Locked On Everydayer Club. You get access to the members-only Discord. You can chat up with me. I'm in there every day, chatting around with your fellow Blazer fans. Plus, ad-free audio of this podcast. It's all of that for $5 a month or $50 a year. LockedOnBlazers.supercast.com. Link in the show notes for more. Tom Dundon on the Game Over podcast with Max Kellerman and Rich Paul that published Friday, May 15th. Link in the show notes if you want to watch it yourself. It's about the last half hour of a longer show, but you can find it and watch it. There's a video version of it if you want to see your boy Tom resplendent with his headphones in. He discussed a couple things. I want to close the show talking about the sort of cheapness label and perception that he doesn't want to spend. And also, like, my legitimate concern is that Tom Dundon doesn't know what he doesn't know. That isn't to say that he's a stupid business person. Dude's made an incredible amount of money, right? Like there's a level of intelligence that you need to be this successful in business, whatever. The thing I'm actually concerned about is the transition to the NBA and your incentives. But we'll talk about those incentives in a moment, because the sort of big news rumbling around in the Blazers world and Portland local media zeitgeist is this renovation negotiations. There's been some back and forth between the Oregonian sports columnist and a city council member that is, quite frankly, pretty goofy on both sides. Nobody comes out looking good in that particular that particular discussion. But Dundon, when asked about it, discussed it in a way that was, quite frankly, familiar to me. It mirrored his comments from his introductory press conference, basically saying, I haven't worried about that yet. If it comes to it, we'll worry about it. Let me read you the quote, though. That's right. I did a little transcribing from a podcast. This is aggregation at its finest. This is the halcyon days of blog boys back here in your podcast feed. In any case, when asked about the sort of relocation and the getting that renovation, which could lead to a potential relocation, he said the following. Quote, before I even bought the team, I had an agreement with the city and the state. We had an agreement in principle. Assuming that all gets done, then this is a non-story. You know, for me, it's never really been a thing. You didn't buy the team to move it. We bought the Portland Trailblazers. That is as close as Dundon has come to saying that he doesn't plan to move it, but it remains the exact same language in the end, because there was this agreement in principle. And it's like, what is the agreement in principle? Well, State Bill 1501 that passed in the Oregon legislature, that passed in early March. Tom Dundon took over at the very end of March. And part of that state bill was approved about $365 million of the Blazers hoping to get up to $600 million. But, we'll call it $360 million for renovation funds. But that was contingent, that bill that passed in the Oregon legislature was contingent upon the county, thus Multnomah County, where the Portland is located, agreeing to footing over some of the bill to cover the rest of the $600 million, and the city of Portland covering about $400 million-ish more money, a little less than that, but I guess they're splitting about $400 million. They're splitting about $340 million there. So let's call it $200 million from the city. That was the agreement in place in principle. Part of that, the state legislature earmarking that funds was contingent upon the Portland Trailblazers, the basketball team, signing a lease, a minimum 20-year lease to remain here. Yeah, he did have this agreement. It was in place. It was negotiated at the state level. What we are now in sort of reached a point where it's like negotiating at the local level. And that has become a little bit messy. But before we get into the mess, and I'll touch on it briefly because it's probably a better story for another day than a middle of this podcast, is Rich Paul he responds to that, we bought the Portland Trailblazers. And Rich Paul kind of gives up the goods. He says, but if you have to, this is a Rich Paul quote, but if you have to, and you're not getting the support from the city or the state, it puts you in a tough spot, right? Rich Paul understands what the deal is here, right? Rich is saying, I don't know, the quiet part out loud. If you don't get responsibility, things get messy. And Dundon does a very good job of being diplomatic here. He says, we would deal with that if it ever comes up, but hopefully it doesn't. We have to solve problems when we have them. Today, the problem we're trying to solve is get a lease extension and get the building renovated. And, those things are fun to do, right? Like, making the building better and adding some energy to the building. Those are things I enjoy doing. That mirrors his comments from his introductory press conference and absolutely does not change the score of the game. Do not get it twisted. The mandate is very clear. Pay up or Dundon has never at any point committed to providing any private money into the renovations of the arena. And based on these particular comments, which are perhaps softer than his comments at Media Day and certainly softer than at his introductory press conference, certainly softer than the interviews he gave privately to reporters from the Oregonian and The Athletic prior to his introductory press conference the day before, Certainly, these are softer. They make him a little more human. I thought in his introductory press conference, he seemed a little less of a villain and more of like a normal person. And I think this interview goes in that same direction, where he just seemed like a normal person. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Pay up, or it's gonna get messy. Like, he's not. The tone hasn't changed. And according to reporting from Shane Dixon Kavanaugh of the Oregonian, that was published in the Oregonian on May 10th, we're still trying to figure out kind of where the money comes from. And it would be, it's going to need the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners and the 12-member Portland City Council will have to approve funding packages. That will be the financial commitment from the local sides, not the state level, but the county and city level. But prior to those finalizing those agreements, and like the project requirements for what the Moda Center renovation is going to look like, because the city, I believe, will get, maybe it's the county, but a local entity will be involved directly to sort of approve the plans and go over costs. And if it runs over how much public money they're given, the Blazers will have to foot the bill, right? Like there's a little bit of bureaucracy to sort of create there. But before they do that, the city and the Blazers will have to negotiate a long-term lease. And basically the deadline to negotiate a long-term lease, the current lease runs out in 2030. That's very quickly. The deadline is probably for realistic, like getting all of the things done they need to get done in order for the Moda Center to host the Women's Final Four in 2030 and also like have these renovations completed is probably like December of this year, which means the clock is ticking, for the city to get something done. I think as my personal opinion, I don't think the city should roll over, belly up, and just say, here, take all the money, Tom. They should negotiate in good faith. But the idea that they have real leverage here with the lease running out in 2030 and the sort of very clear mandate from the ownership, it would be naive to think that you can you could really call Tom Dundon's bluff and end up with anything other than the Portland Trail Blazers leaving town and when the lease expires. What the negotiation, in my opinion, needs where the creativity needs to come from local politicians is getting money on the back end. How can you have a revenue share that makes sense? How can you say hey, we don't tax tickets on any Trailblazers games, but for non-Blazers events that happen there's a higher level of tax that goes back into, say, repopulating the climate fund, which is supposed to be the big thing that they're going to borrow from to renovate the arena, right? Like, I think that's where we're at, because I don't think the mandate hasn't changed from Tom Dundon. Don't get it twisted. A softer, more likable guy who appears in public has not said anything different. What he has said is, we're not worried about that. We're not worried about that because we think this is going to get done. If this gets, what the direct quote, let me read it for you again, is assuming that all gets done, then this is a non-story. Well, if it doesn't get done, it becomes a story, and that's where we are. I think that's a larger concern for another day, and I'll talk about that another day. What I want to talk about is sort of in line with this. Tom Dundon hasn't pledged any private money of his billionaire bank accounts to renovate the arena, because the general idea about Tom Dundon is that he is cheap. That's the perception. And I think there's even been some clear actions of him being cheap. And my concern is not that the team's going to leave town. I think this takes care of itself in the end. My concern is that Tom Dundon doesn't know what he doesn't know. So let's talk about Tom and what he knows and what he doesn't know and why that can be a problem if your mandate is to first save money. Join me in the third segment. We will do just that. First, though, let's talk game time. It's the NBA playoffs. We're headed to the conference finals. I'm recording this actually before Cavs Pistons, so I don't even know where game one of the Eastern Conference Finals is going to be, but it's either in Detroit or New York. And if you want to head there, or you want to head to Oklahoma City to feel the intensity and the crowd and the budding rivalries of the biggest games of the season, well, you're going to need Game Time, who makes it incredibly easy to find tickets, even those hard-to-get playoff games. Just a few taps. You'll get the tickets you want, and with Game Time guarantee, you're getting 100% authentic tickets on time and at the best price. What I like about Game Time is that the app is super easy to use. In fact, I was considering this week going to a Portland Fire game, and I pulled up the phone, the app on my phone, the venue, the Moda Center came up very quickly, and then what you see is what you get pricing. So there's no surprise fees at checkouts. Plus, you just it is moments, a few taps away from having tickets in your inbox. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON, get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use that redemption code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Today's show also brought to you by KALSHI. It's the NBA playoffs. You may have heard of it. It's the most electric time in basketball. And on KALSHI, you can trade every single playoff game, every series from the conference finals and into the NBA finals as we get there. On KALSHI, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the KALSHI app and use the code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade 10. That's KALSHI, KALSHI trade on anything. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Every contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. All right, still a pass versus point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, still listening to Locked On Blazers. There is a perception, perhaps well-earned, that Tom Dundon is cheap. And he was asked about it when he was on the Game Over podcast with Max Kellerman and Rich Paul. Rich Paul, of course, is the head of Clutch Sports, LeBron James's agent, among others, including Young Hansen. But like powerful sports agent and, boxing media member interviewed Tom Dundon, and they like him. But they asked him, they didn't ask him about the coaching search, which I thought was somewhat bizarre, but, they only have so much time. But they did ask him about this perception that he is cheap. And Dundon cleared up two stories, but I think both stories indicate the same thing. He just doesn't know what he doesn't know about running an NBA team. So he says up front, and then this sort of conversation, so we're going to take care of the players because that helps you win. And that's what he's said a bunch of times, and he said it when he, in early transition to take over the Hurricanes, he's going to spend money that impacts on the ice. Spend money on the ice. He's going to, maybe cut back another ancillary spending elsewhere, but spend money on the ice because he wants to win. And again, undeniable how good the Hurricanes have been. That ain't hockey. And I think in some ways, the we're going to take care of the players because that helps you win demands that you understand what actually impacts the players. Dundon, in that same section of the interview, says that the Hurricanes' non-player operations are about $100 million less than that of the Portland Trailblazers. The Portland Trailblazers on just operations costs that are not player salary and not salary, I guess was the implication, but just operating the teams, $100 million more dollars than the Hurricanes. And quite frankly, yeah, dog. Yes. Welcome. It's just a different league. It's just straight up. It's a different league. I don't know that it's $100 million different. I don't understand the finances, right? That, but comparing the operations, it's more expensive to run the Blazers than it is the Hurricanes is quite frankly, somewhat of an alarming comparison. Yeah, yes. This might be a bigger ball game for you, and you might have a little more scrutiny. But Tom Dundon goes on to say, I'm not going to waste $100 million because somebody writes an article calling me cheap. So, but what does waste mean? Certainly, a couple things here. It's not my money. So me yelling Tom Dundon should spend more money is a little bit cringeworthy. I admit it, right? But also it's not your money either. It's just Tom Dundon's money and his fellow owners. Anyone rooting for the Blazers to operate cheaper is me and you, dear listener, are just rooting for different things. I do not care about the business side of the Trailblazers. What matters to me as sort of someone thinking about the basketball game is, do you spend money to win? So certainly, whatever, there's maybe some money in the back end that I don't understand about. But in terms of what actually impacts the Blazers, I think I think this matters, right? He was asked about not traveling the two-way players to the opening rounds of the playoff games. And I think this is just such an insight into what Tom Dundon doesn't know. He said, I just made a mistake. I just didn't understand the league. In hockey, we don't travel extra people because we're not on vacation. We're here to win, so we don't want the distraction. The NBA seems to live with those distractions. Dog, what? That's a nice corporate speak, but what is he talking about when he says that? First of all, it does push back against it was my fault. That's on me, Joe Cronin stuff from X interviews, which is clearly a lie. In the moment, I said as much that he was clearly carrying water for the ownership. Ownership comes out and says, I just made a mistake. Yeah, who hasn't tried to take a fall for their boss, and their boss says, "No, that's actually me. You didn't do it. Like, you didn't do it. It was me." But when he says we're here to win, so we don't want distractions, what he's talking about is bringing Caleb Love on the plane. What? So like, while I don't think like the difference in the Blazers beating the Spurs and like winning in the playoffs had anything to do with the two-way guys getting on the plane, right? That's not what I'm saying. But this is, we're going to take care of the players because that helps you win. A team that is the only team in the league that doesn't travel their two-way players is going to get a reputation of being like, hey, if you have a choice, and maybe you don't as a two-way player, right? Maybe you don't, because there's just so few jobs and it's very scarce and there are non-guaranteed contracts. So maybe it won't matter, right? But if you have a choice of, do I join this team on a two-way or this other team on a two-way? Aren't you going to join the team that just treats you a little better, that like takes you to the playoffs if they win, that like gets you the hotel room and gives you the per diem and like, isn't that actually impactful? Plus, there's like actual basketball stuff here, which is like, if you are going to at any point rely on these two-way guys to play high-level games, giving them first-hand experience of what the high-level games look like, both in preparation, both in intensity on the floor, both in in-game adjustments within the huddle. If you're ever going to rely on them to step forward, giving them less access, less exposure to these high-level games is actually detrimental. That doesn't help you win. That's an issue, right? That, to me, that is like, the NBA seems to live with those distractions. You're talking about players on the roster when you call them distractions. That is not a good look, in my opinion. Yuck, quite frankly. That is someone this is, to me, is just not knowing what you don't know. This seems like a waste of money. And if you don't understand the league, if you don't understand the big picture, and if the mandate is, if the instinct is to save money first, you are bound to make actual mistakes that put you at a competitive disadvantage along the way. To wit, there was also a story first published by, I guess only reported by, Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated, that the Blazers staff during the play-in game were just like milling about in the hotel lobby because they had been forced into early checkout. Tom Dundon addresses that head on, and he basically says, like, you know, they had because they won, they had to book last minute travel accommodations. Because there's last minute travel accommodations, Phoenix was very full. There weren't very many options, and the hotel said, "Hey, we can't give you super late checkout at 4 or 5 p.m. You're gonna have to check out a little bit earlier or pay for an extra night." And Dundon paid for an extra night for the players and the coaching staff, but he did not pay for an extra night for the like non-player, non-coach staff members traveling. You will recall he didn't travel the two-way guys. There was no TV. The TV broadcast was not on the road, right? This was as light a travel group as you're ever going to have in the NBA. Literally the lightest plane they'd had all freaking year, and he doesn't pay for late checkout. Again, I'm not sure that is like a competitive disadvantage on its face, but there was a story in The Athletic on April 22nd that ahead of that game, Tiago Splitter was worried and called a confidant within the league because due to this forced early checkout. Let me tell Tom Dundon's story, and I'll get there in a moment. He says the checkout was at 1 o'clock and that there was a catered lunch at 1:45, and they had this big reserved ballroom in this nice hotel. And so like you could come down and bring your suitcases to the ballroom, and you could sit in there and do the work you needed to do. And then 45 minutes later, you could eat lunch and then get on the bus to go to the arena. The first bus that goes to the arena probably leaves at like 3:30, maybe 4 o'clock. So there is a little bit of downtime in between there. But again, I like that's the, like, whether it was 45 minutes or 2 hours is missing the larger point. According to this reporting from Jason Quick of The Athletic on April 21st, and I will say that this story is extremely favorable to the Blazers ownership group, but he says that all members of the Blazers traveling party, with the exception of players and coaches, had to check out of their hotel at 12:30 in an effort to avoid late checkout fees. That seems to match up with Tom Dundon's exact story. That seems to be exactly what Tom Dundon is saying here. He says 1 o'clock, Quick says 12:30. Sure, let's call it 1 o'clock. Let's say Quick had it slightly wrong. It doesn't matter. That's not the detail. The detail that matters is this. Tiago Splitter had just heard, quote, an earful from the team masseuse, who had nowhere to provide treatment to players ahead of that game. Because what does the team masseuse do? Well, they set up in their hotel room, they get players in there, and they get their bodies worked on before a game. She wasn't the only one complaining. Splitter eventually called a confidant and vented his frustration. Quote from The Athletic. This is whoever Splitter called says, "I told Splitter he can't be focused on this while he's about to coach his most important game. And he was like, but what if the masseuse decides that she doesn't want to do a good job because she's angry, and then she doesn't do a good job on Denny? That affects me too." This affects the players. What Tom Dundon sees as a way to cut costs over the course of the season, he doesn't know what he doesn't know because he doesn't know where the masseuse operates prior to games. This is stuff he doesn't know. And he goes on in his comments to say, I would do it again. And if that doesn't work for you, maybe if you can't handle those decisions, maybe I'm not for you. And okay, great. Congratulations, big dog. Here's my actual concern with this. Dundon says, I would do it again. If that's too hard for people, then I'm not right for them. I want that culture. Here's the thing. And here's, I think, what would actually I view as the challenge as I'm running this show a little bit long, but I have a lot to say here. You hope that Tom Dundon learns from these mistakes. Why don't you travel two-way guys? Well, they don't get the exposure. They're not distractions. They're actually players on the team. You should think of the team as having 18 players, not 15. What are you doing? And two, late checkout fees might matter. I mean, we're maybe over the course of the season, and I believe it's in that Athletic story that they projected that those late checkout fees would save the team about $1 million. But in this particular game, the most important game of the season, we're talking about probably saving somewhere in the range of $9,000 to $20,000, a very small amount of money. And again, this is my actual concern. If the mandate is save money first, cut costs, you are bound to screw stuff up that has actual impact and puts you at a competitive disadvantage and paints the organization in a bad light. If the plan, first and foremost, is to save money, you are going to screw stuff up, like not traveling players, like not giving the masseuse a place to set up, like screwing up the sort of rhythm of the NBA team on the most important game of the season. Again, they won the game. Denny Avdia was awesome. Him not getting a massage was not the thing that set them back, right? Or him getting a massage in a different place was not the thing that deeply set them back, right? The problem is that Dundon says that he's going to take care of players because that helps you win, but he doesn't seem to know what actually takes care of players. What are the things that actually help players? What are the things that put you in a bind? What you hope is that these are the learning curve. This is the learning curve stuff. These are the growing pains of taking over a team. But what my concern is that there wasn't immediate pushback. Joe Cronin not only didn't travel the two-way players, he then tried to take blame for it, right? These are people following marching orders from their new boss. They're not going to say, this doesn't make any sense and scream and yell and complain. You're just going to be a little bit behind in this small competitive disadvantages because the thing you want to do is cut $100 million from your operating budget. If you want to win, you identify first what you need to do and then cut costs second. And Dundon, in his first month on the job, just started saying, let's do this cheaper. Let's do it cheaper. And that is the actual concern. You don't know what you don't know. What Dundon needs is institutional knowledge. He needs someone who can tell him what he doesn't know because it is indeed different. And perhaps he will, right? Perhaps he will. What happens in May of 2026 is not a 10-year projection of truth. But it is, quite frankly, not a great sign that Dundon, who comes off more likable here than he has in some other interviews, is still saying the same things. He's not going to waste money. He doesn't want to live with the distractions of traveling Caleb Love and Chris Youngblood on the plane. It's just, if you can't live with not having a place to do your pregame routine, then you belong somewhere else. I don't know, man. Here's how I feel. I am willing to give Tom Dundon the full benefit of the doubt moving forward. Because if you win in this league, people are not going to be critical. And certainly I will be much, much less critical if the Blazers are effective on the court. But I would be not doing myself a service if I said that I didn't listen to this interview and say, yeah, this is same stuff, different story. And this is someone who doesn't seem like they're willing. They're readily understanding what they don't know. I just made a mistake. I didn't understand the league. But then to call players distractions. If that first part becomes the guiding influence, I just made a mistake. I didn't understand the league. And Dundon is committed to understanding the league. This is probably a non-story. But just like the arena stuff, the if is doing the heavy lifting there. If. And if he does indeed understand the league eventually and figure it all out, I will not be that critical of him. I will be complimentary when he deserves it. But I did not come away from listening to this interview and think like, yeah, he's changed. What a good dude. I can't wait to see how he's going to help this team win basketball games. And maybe you did. I guess that is why we all were given 2 ears in order to hear things the way we hear them. That is going to do it for today's show. We will do 5 of these, or I guess 4 more the rest of the week is what we do. 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts, also on YouTube. Tell your friends about the podcast. I appreciate you listening. I will talk to you soon.